We don't have any more gunpowder. And as they're looking at each other like, we have got to get the heck out of here, otherwise we're going to get annihilated, God providentially moves the smoke in the air and just thickens it and confuses the British Army. True story. Hey, welcome back to Luso, a show about our great country and about the God stories from the 1776 time period, frankly, 1776 to 1781, as we're talking about the American Revolution. And, of course, the show revolves around coffee because everything's better in life with coffee. I'm just throwing that out there in case you didn't know that. You should know that. Matter of fact, I've often wondered, what did coffee taste like in 1776? Does it taste the same as today? I don't know. I'm wondering. Well, if you haven't noticed, we got this big fancy cake here, and we just keep saying, hey, look, our nation's 250th anniversary is coming up. It's just like a month away. Here we are, December 2025, and we're counting down the days to 2026. July 4th, 2026. It's coming up. But what was it that was going on back? Like, why is this a big deal? Like, what is it there to celebrate? When we look at our birthdays in our lives, we hit those milestones, we always celebrate. Matter of fact, in Hollywood, which we've been talking a lot about, Hollywood's not talking about 250. I don't know why, but Hollywood does bring back movies that, like, 50 years later, it was a big movie, right? Jaws was this summer. We just went and saw Back to the Future. It was this 50th anniversary. So Hollywood recognizes these big milestones with their movies. Why aren't they talking about our nation's 250th anniversary? I don't know. I mean, it's like we just have crickets. I keep talking about the book 1776. There's another book, Bunker Hill. Bunker Hill was signed by the film rights. Warner Brothers has had those film rights since 2013. Ben Affleck's been attached. You would think that's all they need. I don't know. I'm just saying. Ben Affleck, Ben Affleck, if you're watching, man, I hope you make that movie. But, next year will be the perfect time to tell that story. But I don't know. I think, look, because Hollywood's not talking about it, that's why we're talking about it. And that's why you're here. You're tuning in. Because we're talking about the God stories from 1776, which I don't even think Hollywood would touch those with a 10-foot pole or however big the pole is. I don't know. But they would be far away from that. Matter of fact, we can see that with the Benjamin Franklin series that came out last year. And it was it was not a family-friendly show. Let me just throw that out. It was historical, but then they had the transgender guy, and then there's his grandson's drawing gay pornography and stuff. I'm like, really? Why do we have to do this? Just, tell the story of our founding father. That's what I think. But anyway, hey, today's fourth God story is smoke, the smoke. All right, so keep that in mind, the smoke. Have you ever gone to a carnival or a fair and you go to the House of Mirrors, the House of Mirrors, you walk into that whole, I don't know, it's not really a ride. I don't know what we call that, but you know what I'm saying? Well, you go to the House of Mirrors is a room full of all these mirrors, and you go inside and you get easily confused. You're like, all of a sudden, I don't even know where the heck I am. And we see this in movies. Matter of fact, we've seen it for 100 years. You go back to Charlie Chaplin, and he was doing some of this in his movies. Even more recently, like Stranger Things and John Wick. There's movies that even recently where they have they're trying to shoot each other, but they're in the House of Mirrors and they don't know who to shoot at, and they're like, I don't know where the guy is. You get confused in those houses. If you've ever been to a carnival and you've gone to one of those, you're like, I don't even know where I am. I have no idea what's going on, and you're just confused, right? You just I don't know. I don't even know how to get out of here. Well, think about that. So go back in time, June of 1775. So mind you, this is before we declared our independence from Great Britain. Okay, so that was July 4, 1776. So here we are, June 1775, and the British have come. If you listen to yesterday's story about the speech, right? That was God's story number 3. The speech was Patrick Henry, and that was March of 1775, and he was just firing up the Virginians, saying, look, we have got to take up arms. I don't know about you, but give me liberty or give me death. Well, only a few more months later, now the British troops have arrived, And we're talking like hundreds of ships arrived in the bay in Massachusetts. And they are now offloading and they are coming after the folks in Massachusetts. Now, again, like I've already said, I've already unpacked the fact that we don't have an army. Like, we are just a bunch of colonial farmers, ragtag group of teenagers. That's what we are. And if you've been there downtown Boston, you'll see Bunker Hill. I just talked about Bunker Hill, a great book that came out back in about 15 years ago. And Hollywood hasn't made it. They've had the film rights, but they're not making it. But the real story there at Bunker Hill in Boston is the British are coming in and they're trying to take the hill. So they're fighting uphill. And the colonials have the advantage. Matter of fact, there's a tower. I've been there in Boston. You can go in the tower that kind of signifies this epic moment in time. And I've been up to the tower and you're kind of looking out over Boston. So if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. But so back to our story. So here, Bunker Hill, the British Army, the world's superpower, mind you, they're going up the hill, and the colonials are farmers. They're shooting down the hill, but the British are way outnumber our ragtag army, way outnumber. So they're like coming up, they're advancing pretty quickly. Well, while they're advancing really quickly, the colonial farmers realize they're running out of gunpowder. So again, they're not. We haven't declared independence. There is no funding. This is just literally a group of farmers like, hey, we need to defend our homes. And they're running out of gunpowder. Well, if you know this story, the British had already burned Charleston, which is the town around Bunker Hill. They burned it to the ground. So as they've burned it to the ground, there's smoke in the air. There's chaos. It's one of those just battles where it's just, it's chaos for the colonials because they're not even an army. They're not even trained military. And now they're fighting against the world's most trained military who are coming at them. They're charging up the hill. Adds that moment of time where they're running out of gunpowder and they're all looking down the row at each other and they're like, crap, we don't have any more gunpowder. Like we got muskets, but they're running out of musket balls and gunpowder. And as they're looking at each other like, we have got to get the heck out of here, otherwise we're going to get annihilated, God providentially moves the smoke in the air and just thickens it and confuses the British Army. True story. Go look this up. Like, that's a God thing. Like, there's no other way to explain that. Like, God moves it and it just thickens right then and there at that moment in time. And you're like, that's crazy. Like, that wasn't like, there was nobody doing that other than God. You can't explain that other than God. So here, Bunker Hill, and the colonial farmers are watching this, looking down the hill at the British, getting confused. And they're like, this is the time for us to, get out of Dodge. And so they get what's called an orderly retreat in place. And they are able to, get out and retreat and be able to fight another day. And what should have been just a dismal loss for the colonials. Like, literally, they did lose. I mean, historically, we know that. They lost. But afterwards, they were all just talking like, did you see that smoke? Did you see the British Army completely confused? Did you see what? And all they could say was, that was the hand of God. That was all they could say. They looked at it and they were just like, so they were like, that was God. There's no other way to explain it. And what should have been a dismal loss, and their countenance and just feeling, like, why are we even thinking we can fight against the world's strongest army? In fact, it turned the opposite, and they're like, God is on our side. We can do this, even though they retreated and they lost. So if you look historically at what took place there at Bunker Hill, it actually was the beginning of a God-inspired army that was beginning to form based on what took place at Bunker Hill. Go look it up. It's extraordinary. But all you can say is God moved, like God could clear out the smoke if he wanted to with wind, right? Only God controls the wind. That God could have. But what he did was he confused the British Army with the smoke that day. And in fact, we now have this great country today because of those little things like that God was doing. So, hey, that's one more, our fourth God story from the American Revolution, the smoke. And if you tune back in tomorrow, we'll talk about number 5. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Hit subscribe below. But more than that, click the link below, luso.tv. Watch our short film. That's how you can really help us. Together, you and I, together, we can educate 83% of Americans that don't understand why we fought the American Revolution. But I need your help. We need your help. So share it with your friends. Pay it forward. Send it to 1,000 of your friends. Okay, maybe 100, 10 of your friends. Pay it forward. Click the link, luso.tv.